Hi guys.
Hi, yeah, it's Andy. Hi, Francis. Yesterday and many times you've said before that we should live our lives according to this understanding.
Yeah,
This understanding that we are one consciousness, that there is one reality, and we are that. Um, I guess I just wanted to ask if you could expand a little bit more on that. Are we talking kind of about our relations with other people, about decision making, about where we spend our time? Is it kind of everything like that?
yeah, yeah, exactly. Uh, it's very easy. Just observe what is happening in your life from moment to moment. Most of the time, what is happening is that we are thinking, we are feeling, and we are perceiving, right?
Yeah.
That's a passive, relative, relatively passive condition to the extent that thoughts come to us without us following a goal, having a goal in mind. Like when you just meditate without having a purpose in the moment itself, the first thing that comes to us are these three aspects: thoughts, feelings or bodily sensations, and external sense perceptions. So that's how we live our life. That's the first level, if you will, of our human experience. And then we have interaction with people or with other sentient beings. We have
Mhm.
reactions to events that happen in the world around us. And finally, we have intentions, meaning goals in mind, right? So when I say to live our life in accordance with this understanding, it involves all of these elements. So going back to the beginning, we will start with thoughts. And what does it mean to think then in accordance with the truth? It means that every thought which is predicated upon the belief that we are a separate consciousness is not in accordance with the truth. So any other thought is in accordance with the truth. So we can verify at every moment about each thought that arises in us whether this thought is in accordance with the truth or not. That takes care of this first arising of thoughts when we are not interacting with anybody, just when we are on our own, so to speak. And then
Mhm.
there are bodily sensations. There are bodily sensations, so it is the same. There are bodily sensations that are not in accordance with truth, and there are bodily sensations that are. Any bodily sensation, and the ones that are not in accordance with truth, are of two kinds. One kind are bodily sensations that seem to be evidence that we, as consciousness, are localized in this body, that we are separate from our surroundings. That's the first kind. They are direct feelings of separation. And then there is a second type of feeling of separation, which is not a direct feeling of separation, but which is an emotion that is triggered by the thought of separation. In other words, if the thought of being separation has not been filtered out, so to speak, if it has been condoned, then down the road it triggers an emotional response in the body, which is a response of a sense of lack, which deals to fear and desire. So that's the second aspect of that relates to how we feel in the body, but also it deals to with how we perceive the world. Do we perceive in separation or not? You see? So that deals with, in fact, the three first elements so far that I have mentioned: how we think, how we perceive the bodily sensation, how we perceive the world, right? And now there is a question of interaction with others. But we should notice that if these three first conditions have been met, in other words, if we think in accordance with the truth, if we feel in accordance with the truth, and if we perceive in accordance with the truth, already our interaction with other people will be in accordance with the truth. Because physically, we won't feel, I am here and you are there. We will feel that there is a seamless connection, on the level of feelings, no separation. And then on the level of thought also, we are not going to establish our interaction on the basis that I am here as a separate person from you as a separate consciousness. Quite the opposite. The interaction will get established on the basis that you and I are the same consciousness. But I still mention that to interact in accordance with the truth, because it's never too late to realize that it's like a plan B. If the thought of separation or if the feeling of separation has escaped our attention, and then we begin interacting with that person on an ignorant basis, on a separation basis, it's never too late to come back, to rectify the connection. You see? It is the same, and then we talk about how we react to events in the world. And our reaction to events in the world is first also physical and also intellectual, in that sense that we use our thoughts. And it's the same here. These events that happen, adverse events or events we like, if we are not filtered out the thought and the feeling of separation, it's never too late now to change through this understanding the way we react to the external event, to realign our reaction to the truth. And finally, the last element I mentioned was how we act in the world. In other words, a goal. Then we have to ask also, same thing, if we already think, perceive, and feel in accordance with the truth, automatically our goals will be kosher, if you will. But if we have relapsed into ignorance, it's never too late to reassess the nature of the goal and to ask the question, what is the purpose? Where does this intention come from? In other words, is it legitimate or not? And then we have to ask the question, would I do the same thing? Would I pursue the same goal if I didn't believe to be a separate consciousness? And that's the benchmark here. To ask yourself this question. Would I do the same? Would I do the same if I didn't believe to be a separate consciousness? Is my action predicated or not predicated upon the belief to be a separate consciousness? That's the razor's edge here that discriminates between the two and brings about clarity in the situation. And of course, if I realize it's never too late, as I said, if at that moment it becomes clear that I would have done the same no matter what I believe, then we can carry on. If this action, this intention is predicated upon the belief to be a separate entity, then I have to let go of it. So these are, if you will, the various comments and the various ways I can elaborate on this basic principle. I would add this, that such an action, talking about the action, is eminently ethical, and that's the definition of ethics, of what is good. What is good for all parties involved, and this action, which is good, which is in line with the truth, will lead to an increase in harmony, both within and without. It is a good karma, if you will. It's a good karmic action.
Thanks. Yeah, it's been really helpful. I guess kind of useful to go into a couple of examples, if possible. So we're talking about emotions and fear. I guess there must still be times where some kind of fearful reaction is the right reaction and isn't necessarily coming from a sense of separation. You know, if someone's about to attack you, you're going to feel
of course
fear, right?
The body is programmed for that. The body is programmed for its survival. So anything that potentially threatens the survival of the body will tend to trigger. And then this reaction is of two kinds, because we have inherited through our genes some patterns that are meant to keep us safe, to save our lives, and to fight or to flee in presence of a predator, of a clear and present danger. But if we look at animals, the moment the clear and present danger has disappeared, they go back to stillness, you see?
Yeah.
They don't worry too much about the morrow, right? And it is the same here regarding our physical animal reaction. Let's say you are driving and you are avoiding a collision, and in the seconds before that you have a big emotion of fear, but after that everything without you doing anything to that end goes back to normal, right? Now, because we are human beings, there is another component to it that can trigger negative emotion, which is thoughts, right? So you go to the doctor tells you, okay, you have a life-threatening disease, right? So initially, it is completely normal to have this reaction, which is an elaborate animal reaction facing an imminent danger that applies to the body. So that's normal. But what is not normal then is to keep going on with that, because if we come back to our experience and understanding that consciousness is universal, beyond death, etc., then just as in the case of the avoided collision, everything goes back to peace. In the case of such a intellectual collision, a bad news, which may, in the moment itself, trigger a visceral reaction, if you will, then everything goes back naturally to peace. It's not the same if we are in ignorance. If we are in the ignorance, there is no end to fear, you see?
Yeah, okay, that makes sense. Yeah, I mean, one thing I've noticed over time is now I've always been very laid back, but in certain situations, maybe where before I would have stayed quiet, now I will actually react sometimes. And it's quite quick, and then it's gone. Like it seems to be a bit of almost a slight change in character. But I think I hope it's more about this kind of it's not I don't think anyway about fear. It's
What we do,
more just
we can
something's
observe,
not right. If you make a point,
we can observe in hindsight that we have changed, that we react very differently in many circumstances. But on the other hand, there are also qualities that belong really to the genes, to the body mind, that remain, if you have Italian genes, you may react differently from having Norwegian genes.
Yeah.
It belongs to the body, it's normal.
Yeah. Okay, thanks very much.
It's just
Yes, hi Judy.
Hi Francis, I'm happy to meet you. I've been coming to your teachings for about 8 months and doing meditations, and I followed the pebbles that brought me here, and I'm happy to be here, so thank you.
Welcome.
I have 2 questions, and I think they're related to some of my exploring in the spirit world in the past and how it may be similar or dissimilar from Advaita. So the first question is, when I'm in meditation in the chair or in the world, I have this feeling of expansiveness and happiness and lightheartedness, and it continues until something troubles me. And it occurred to me that it feels quite similar to what I called calm abiding in the Buddhist tradition. And when I was in the presence of His Holiness the Dalai Lama, I had a very similar feeling. Would you say those were similar or different? Just different sensations?
You know, I've never met the Dalai Lama, so I cannot comment, and I cannot comment really either what you have experienced. Is for you to know what your experience felt like. But what I can say is this. But let me tell you first a story. It was Rumi and his disciples. And one day the local sultan or king or whatever decided to pay a visit to Rumi, who had become famous. And so the king comes with the courtesans and everything goes very nicely. The king asks some questions, and then the king and his entourage leaves. And then the disciples go to Rumi and they are very happy. I say, oh, now that the ruler and the court have come here and they have listened to your words and they have been in your presence. Now everything will be different. Now they are becoming truth lovers and our country is going to be paradise on earth. And Rumi tells them, not so far. Regarding the truth, there are three categories of people. Some are like gunpowder. Once they are in the presence of truth, they kind of explode. Others are like wood. When they are in the presence of the flame of truth, it takes some time. But after some while, they burn. And some are like stones. When they are in the presence of truth, they warm up. When they leave the truth, they cool off. So, the first and second experience, the gunpowder and the wood, these are the real truth seeker. The stones. Something in their life was meant to take them there, and who knows what may happen later. Nothing happens by chance, right? But for some reason, they weren't ready. They didn't ignite, you see? And the reason why they didn't ignite is very simple. Is that they came to the truth for the wrong reason. They didn't come to the truth because they were seeking the truth. They came to the truth because they had an ulterior motive. For instance, oh, this guy is famous, you know, let's go and see the guy. Or, well, this guy has a lot of influence in the kingdom, so I'd better have him on my side, you know, political motives, just some kind of curiosity, but not really interest in seeking the truth. That's that which marks the dividing line. I know that my answer seems to you to be far from the question, but I come to it. We cannot, we have to understand that whatever we feel in the presence of truth is a phenomenal or a phenomenal event that happens in the body and in the mind. and that as such, this event is going to be impermanent. Unlike the understanding really brings about a change from which there is no return, which is irreversible. And this change will always be there, and it is the meaning of the word initiation. It sets into motion a process that is not going to end until everything ends. So it's for you to know, what is it I am seeking? Am I seeking these states of the body and of the mind? Is that what I call abiding in presence? Or am I in love with the presence which is always present? You see, that's the difference. The true presence is always present. We are that in which we pretend to be abiding. There is nobody to abide in the truth. We are the truth in which everything abides, you see. It's a complete reversal of perspective. I am nothing, and he is everything. That's a kind of Sufi expression, that's the meaning. I am a fanatic. The word fana means extinction. There is nobody here. Only God is. There is nothing that is not God, Wherever the eye falls is the face of God. That's the meaning. So do we seek truth, or do we seek a spiritual state? That's a question we have to answer for ourselves. Usually,
thank you.
Usually those who come here, they seek truth.
Yes, I'm very happy to be here now. It feels like it's been a circuitous route to be here, but I am benefiting. I meditate every day to one of your guided meditations, and I see things changing in my life and my world. So I thank you for allowing all of us to access you. So thank you.
Good to see you.
Oh, hello.
Yes, hi.
Hi, Francis. Oh, my heart is killing me. So my question is, it's the question is killing me more than my heart right now. So I really want to know what is the mechanic behind what you do when you answer to people, but specifically when you close your eyes, when you get a question from someone, sometimes you close your eyes, you postpone the answer. It's killing me. I really want to know what you do.
I'm not here. I'm not even aware that that is happening. But I think that it's kind of eliminating. You say if you need to get some intuition of something, if you need to understand something, you want to eliminate. And if you are in a noisy place, you want to eliminate the noise that may distract you because you need to really have all your attention going to that place. And just as external noise may be a hindrance, visual images, also may be a hindrance also to this kind of focusing that happens automatically, where we go to this place of understanding, this place of truth. So perhaps that's the reason why I close my eyes. I think we all do that when we seek something new, when we seek creativity, when we seek, but it's not necessary. For instance, in this moment, as I'm speaking to you, the eyes remain open.
True. Also, can I was always so curious, but it's true. We all somehow have that. It's a natural thing to do. I found something very weird when I sleep. When I go to sleep, if the sleep is not too long, the condition of the body and of the mind kind of continue. For example, if the body feels transparent at night, I go to sleep and it kind of continues if I didn't sleep too much. But when I go to sleep and try to accumulate like 7-8 healthy hours of sleep, I kind of lose the transparency, the progress, let's call it progress, of the mind and the body. So it starts from zero the next day.
You mean if you sleep too much, you lose the transparency?
The first cycle is perfect. It continues. But when I wake up, it's still dark outside. So I need to sleep again. The next time I wake up, it's going to be less and less. And with each subsequent cycle of sleep, it's the last one is the worst. I need to wake up, I don't know what, it's not a problem since
we have, I think we have two main cycles of sleep. The most important is the first one.
Right.
And the first one is kind of a cleansing of the events of the day or of the prior days, everything that has not been really dealt with. And then we wake up. And then we need some additional rest. And I think perhaps there is a physiological reason for that there are other organs that in the body that come into play and in turn need some rest. But on the spiritual level, after these first 5 hours or 4 hours, when the junk has been dealt with, there is more clarity. And so whether we sleep or not, if we sleep and dream, the dream have a different quality. They are more creative. They are more enjoyable in a sense. And also, it's a creative moments. Many, for instance, a scientific discovery have been made by scientists upon waking up after 5 hours at night or so. I would give 2 examples. One is Kekulé. Kekulé is a chemist who discovered the structure of the benzene molecule, C6H6. And the reason was that before that, in organic chemistry, they would put the molecule in a straight line. And in the case of benzene, they knew the composition, 6 atoms of carbon and 6 atoms of hydrogen, but they didn't know how to put that as a structure. And this guy has said, oh yeah, I take this line and I close it. That was it. That was the intuition. And now he had discovered the structure of the benzene molecule. Another example was one of the teachers at mathematical teachers at my alma mater, the École Polytechnique. His name is Laurent Schwartz. And I was sitting there with a group of students listening to him outside. And he was telling the story of how he discovered the main intuition that led to his main mathematical discovery called the theory of distribution. And it was the same. It was upon waking up in the middle of the night that he had this, he saw it in one single moment. And then all the rest, more or less, of his scientific career was the milking the cow he had discovered at 5 a.m. in the morning or so. And I'm not saying that all discoveries or scientific or artistic intuitions come in this way. Some people say that some composition by Mozart, he saw them like in a single moment. He listened to the Jupiter Symphony in a single moment and then took time to transcribe all the parts. But also an artistic process, a process of artistic creation or scientific creativity is to move step by step. Like a painter, he starts a painting and then looks at it, goes back to the source of creativity and say, okay, I'm going to add this, I'm going to change that, looks at it, goes back to the source. So there is a series of iterations, back and forth. And that's also another way creativity happens. So it doesn't necessarily happen in one single shot. But in these cases of great clarity, it's amazing that this deep intuition have come in this moment in the night, upon waking up, this moment of when the garbage of the previous day has been disposed of, so to speak.
Crystal clear. Thank you so much.
Yes, hi Pietro.
Hey, Francis. If I may, I would like to ask you 3 questions. I think the answers will be quick. So the first one...
Yeah, one after the other, please.
Oh, okay, of course. The first one is regarding to people with mental disorders. Do you think, in your opinion, that people with, like, for example, schizophrenia, that their perceptions are usually distorted? Do you think this kind of thing is a problem when they try to recognize their true nature and to be established in it?
The question is, if they come to a teacher, what is the intention? Is the intention about the truth or the intention of getting rid of their physiological problem. It is the same, you know, if someone has cancer and comes to a teacher because they hope that the teacher, due to his magical powers, is going to cure them from cancer. It's not going to work. It's very different if they have cancer and facing a possible death. That triggers in them a question about their own identity. Then they are coming to the teacher for the right reason. So in the case of mental illnesses, you know, these are, I mean, for me, when we are talking about mental disorder, and I am not an expert, you know, so I'm just, you know, I cannot certify what I'm saying, but I have observed something that things like schizophrenia, bipolar disorders, they run in families, you know. And what is weird is that the mother is diagnosed with schizophrenia and the son is diagnosed with bipolar, and down the road the grandson is diagnosed with a different type of illness, but there is a kind of, so the question remains, is it nature or nurture, you know, and perhaps a little bit of both. But there is also something else that has to be added. Because then the question is, can falling in love with the truth cure that? And if it is a genetic thing, of course, it's not going to change the nature of the chromosomes, right? And of the genes. So the answer is no. Now, however, what happens if a child is born who is not like the other children, you know, and the parents put some pressure on the child, and that creates a lot of, it builds up a sense of separation, a sense of, in other words, in addition to the mental illness, it adds a layer of psychological suffering, which is related to ignorance, and that can disappear. Mm-hmm. You see, but ultimately, you know, it is the case that some people with very severe mental disorders, that's what they need. They come to a teacher, they get a glimpse, and often pretty soon after that, they move on, you know, they die. Because that's what was needed, you know. And destinies are beyond our understanding.
Before I asked you this question, Francis, I really suppose that this kind of people, as you said, doesn't have their condition cured because of the glimpse, but maybe because of the glimpse they can maybe live their life in a better way, you know? That's what I supposed. But yeah.
But there are circumstances when the mental disorder is so deep, you know, that there is no hope, there is no, and there are conditions like that. I remember Jean Klein had a student who was a psychiatrist in Belgium. and he had a clinic in Belgium. And or hospital, whatever. And so he invited Jean, because he was curious to see whether Jean, the presence of Jean with his patient would, and of course they were committed, you see, it was in a mental institution. And he was curious to see what the impact would be. I still remember his name. There were two brothers here. His name was either Yo or Ivo. I don't remember which one, but it was one of these two, Yo or Ivo. And Jean went and spent a day there. And then the next week, I happened to pay a visit to my teacher in Paris. And I asked him, how did it go? How did it go? And he said, yes, I could see that some of them became more still. That was his answer.
Yeah. Nice. Francis, and the second and third question is related. So I'll try to formulate in one sentence. I recently saw in your YouTube channel that it has been posted a quote that you mentioned maybe in a video that says that our last perception before we go into the background of presence is the sense of I or I am. First, I would like to know because I thought that I or I am is presence. Isn't so? Or I or I am is something that...
Well, it depends. If this, what we call the sense of I am, has the shape of a thought or the shape of a bodily sensation or the shape of a sense perception, you see, then it is the last thought, bodily sensation or sense perception that then merges with the background. So that we have, in other words, we have to be very clear about how we define sense of I. That implies also that if this, what is defined as a sense of I, is something that lingers in time, it means that it has a kind of phenomenal quality to it. The presence is not something that lingers in time. It is rather that in which time lingers. It is very important because often what people call to abide in silence or to abide in presence or to abide in peace, they don't realize it, but they in fact abide in a phenomenon. They abide in some subtle projections that is merely a mind-made representation of consciousness, which of course appears in consciousness, but which is not the consciousness in which it appears, which has some inherent limitations, one of which being to linger in time. So that's really a good benchmark, you know, to find out. Is my sense of I lingering in time? or is time lingering in it? Are time and all the perceptions that come with it. Another way is, does this sense of I appear and disappear? Because if it appears and disappears, it is still being interpreted as a phenomenon. So there is a misinterpretation right there. Very different if we say no, it's always there, and objects, phenomena, perceptions appear in it. But it never goes away. There is not a moment when I am not myself as this presence.
Okay, it clarifies a lot. And the last thing, Francis, if I may ask you, in your own experience, first, I understand that to abide in presence is to stop believing that our consciousness is limited.
Right.
So, so if I may ask you, in your own experience, when you, for instance, find yourself lost in ignorance, what's the mental process that happens in your case? Do you have a thought about awareness? Do you just drop the belief? Do you maybe, I don't know, does something happen? Do you ever thought about that?
It never happens that if I ask myself what I am, what am I, it never happens that I say, that I think, that I feel I am limited. It never happens. What may happen is that an old pattern that was predicated a long time ago upon the belief to be separate, that in a given situation, these old patterns comes back, and seems to be activated as a reaction to a situation. That may happen. It happens less and less. But then, because the belief onto which this pattern was predicated has been eliminated, it cannot last. You see, it cannot perpetuate itself. It collapses. So that's a big difference. These are called these residues of ignorance. And now there are patterns that may look like ignorance, and when I check them out, if they happen, I observe what was the foundation for that. I always notice that in this case, there are not patterns that have they are natural patterns. For instance, outrage. You see, you give an example of I was in an airport walking towards my destination, and there was a couple with a child walking in opposite direction, and the child was young, perhaps 4, and the man started slapping violently the child, and I felt this anger, this. But then in hindsight, if you will, it's natural. That doesn't come from ignorance, you understand? It has the shape of anger. It's outrage, right? It has the emotional reaction that prepares the body for fighting the guy, you know, because that's the animal instinct. And then reason comes. I analyze what's going on here, you know, and what am I going to do? You know, call the cops, fight the guy, you know, and what came to me in this situation is just to look at the guy with a very disapprobating face. You know, that, in other words, the intelligence comes in and correct the primary reaction of anger, you know, because the primary reaction of anger is not subtle enough, because the proper reaction has to be loving for the child, loving for the mother who was living with this guy, but also loving for the guy. And I thought in that case, given the entire situation, what came in this moment to be the impersonal decision was that. And the guy went, "What are you looking at?" You know? And I kept looking at him like that, you know, standing there. He could have hit me. You see, that was the thing. You can hit me, you know. I'm not hitting you, but you can hit me if you want, you see. He didn't, of course. And then I moved. So he became aware of his violence. He became aware that it was not something to do. And perhaps it was not the proper situation, the proper reaction, but at least I did my best to filter the first impulse. I recognized that it was impersonal, but that I kind of was the best way in this case what was to move from war to diplomacy.
I guess it was a kind of maybe a sacred anger that you had, you know? It wasn't a personal anger.
Yeah, and we have to be, since your accent reminds me of my ancestors, right, from Genoa. An Italian story that happened to my teacher. He was in Sicily, and there was a man and a woman fighting, you know, and beating each other, you know. And as a gentleman, you know, he went there defending the woman, you know, and tried to separate them. They started both hitting him because he was being busy with something that was not his business. So he told me, well, I took my lesson then before I interfere in other people's life.
Yeah, I got it. Chris, I asked you this because about your own experience, because even though I understand that I'm always, independently of the circumstance, I'm always awareness, consciousness, I usually like to have something handy to use. For example, when I find myself in a situation very extremely, very demanding, I usually like to think, to use the thought I am, you know? And I would like to have your answer, your point of view. In that case, is this a lack of understanding on my part, or is this normal? You know, to grab into something more material, per se. You know.
No, it's a very good idea. As a tool, you know, to take the thought. Not just I am, but take the thought, I am infinite. I am everywhere. I am you. not just I am, because if I say I am, I could still be separate, I could still be limited. So take the thought, I am infinite, I am you, I am everywhere, I am without borders, this type of thought. There was a spiritual teacher in France, his name was Hubert Benoit. He came from the Zen tradition. And he was using the word in French, le contre-travail intérieur, the inner counter work. It was a method in which, in any given situation, instead of working out the situation from the perspective of being separate, you would take the opposite, the counter work, the contre-travail intérieur. You would take the alternate position of being infinite. Although you don't have evidence that consciousness is infinite, right? That you are infinite. You don't have evidence for that. But the good news is you don't have evidence that you are not infinite. So it is a kind of experiential way to find out whether you're infinite or not, right? Based upon the outcome of this new position you are taking. So, and that's, of course, it's a tool. It's a gadget that you use, right? You don't need to do that for the rest of your life. But it's a tool that you use, and then naturally, after a while, this tool disappears. You don't need to use it any longer because something has changed in you, and you don't have to remind yourself somehow, I am infinite. You know, it's, I am what I am, let's go for it, you know. And so that's, in the Indian tradition, they refer to that as a stick which is used to, a wooden stick to activate the fire that eliminates the residues of ignorance. But at the end, the stick is thrown into the fire and the stick also burns away.
Francis, really, I can't thank you enough for the answers. Thank you very much.
You're welcome.